Day 297. Odyssey log. The first private research vessel to cross the wormhole carrying 12 men and the greatest ambition humanity has ever hidden from its government. We are not part of NASA. We are not recognized by SETI. We belong to one man, Nicholas Vaughn, a tech billionaire who spent billions building Odyssey under the radar because he believes the truth never comes from those in power. It all started with a signal. The Voyager Golden Record came back distorted with a DNA sequence that didn't match any living thing on Earth. There were only 2 words in that radio wave: welcome home. We didn't fly out to find answers. We flew out because that signal pulled us through the door. A deep rumble echoed through the Odyssey's steel frame. In the cockpit, seatbelts tightened around everyone's shoulders. Dim blue LEDs reflected off the helmets stowed beside the seats. On the radar screens, Earth's orbit was gone, replaced by a spiraling strip of data. Ben, the chief engineer, muttered, eyes never leaving the coordinates. This whole calculation, it wasn't written by a human. It was automatically inserted from the signal. Beside him, Mark, the youngest signals officer, licked his dry lips, his hand shaking slightly as he pressed the lock button on his screen. NASA would call this suicide, but Nicholas wants the data, and there's no going back. A row of green lights ran across the cockpit. On the monitor, the word "Welcome Home" flashed 3 times, a steady electronic tone from the Odyssey AI system. Each time the signal repeated, the antenna array responded to the frequency like a metal heart beating in space. Jonathan squinted as the plasma began to spiral around the bow. He breathed, his voice low. "We are not here to conquer it. We are here to prove. This signal is not a greeting. It is an order." The wormhole drive roared like a broken ocean. The screen shook slightly, then there was an eerie silence. Outside, the small window space curved into a liquid mirror. The numbers of time speed suddenly stopped. Only the words, "Signal locked, welcome home," remained lit on the screen. Mark laughed, his laughter drowned out by the pounding of his heart in his earpiece. Oh my God, if Earth could hear this signal, it would probably launch a spacecraft too. White light filled the cockpit. One last pulse, and Odyssey fell out the other side like dust blown from a space-time keyhole. When the tremors subsided, the Odyssey was floating. Everyone opened their eyes. A secondary screen came on, an external camera focused. Ahead of the ship's space was no longer pitch black. Instead, a planet hovered glowing with life. The jungle glowed as if it were breathing purple plasma, streaming through the thick atmosphere, reflecting the faint sunlight in the distance. Ben looked at Jonathan, his voice hoarse. "We are home." Jonathan didn't answer. On the cabin speaker, the AI Odyssey read the signal one last time, its artificial voice cold, "Welcome home." Outside the glass, Zorathia drifted slowly like a giant sleeping creature, opening its eyes to greet the strangers who had just torn through its curtains. Odyssey is in orbit. Nicholas Vaughn is waiting for the first data, but as for us, no one is sure Zorathia will let us leave. Because when you look at a new world, that world begins to look back. Odyssey hovered in Zorathia's orbit like a metal eye. In the control bay, the gyro stabilizer system vibrated softly, creating a low hum that echoed throughout the ship. A row of lights on the control panel blinked green, signaling that Odyssey had locked onto a new planet more than 500 miles above the surface. Jonathan leaned against the thick window frame, staring through the multi-layered reflective glass. Below, Zorathia didn't just glow, it moved. The forest changed color like aurora strands tethered to the ground, curling and splitting. Every now and then, a thin streak of plasma swept through the clouds, flashing like cold lightning. Ben, the chief engineer, strapped on his equipment for a final check, his voice monotone, orbit stable. avoiding all strong magnetic fields. Radar antenna running 92%. Spectral mirror on. Jonathan nodded. He glanced over to the observation module. The antennae that had been folded into Odyssey's side were beginning to slowly unfold. The metal blades glinted through the glass from the observation cabin, reflecting the faint sunlight in the distance. When they were fully extended, Odyssey looked like a metallic spider spinning a web against the night sky. In the engineering bay, Mark, the signals analyst, ran his fingers across a row of consoles. The screens before him were filled with data columns of radiation, plasma wave oscillations, ionized atmosphere. Each radar ping that hit Zorathia brought back a new string of information: cloud temperatures, plasma dust thickness, unexplained magnetic interference. "What are we going to get from this data?" Mark asked, his eyes glued to the numbers. Ben glanced over. "The truth, or at least something Vaughn can sell to the world." Jonathan lightly touched the button to launch the bio-drone array. A small door on the side of the Odyssey slowly opened. Inside, dozens of butterfly-shaped drones were neatly stacked, their outer shells covered in reflective scales like dragonfly wings. The scales weren't just pretty, they helped the drones breathe heat, regulating the temperature of their shells, so they didn't radiate obvious heat signals, avoiding stimulating the biosphere below. A drone lifted off first. Its beacon light flickered. As it slid into space, its wings unfolded, spreading out like a metallic kite. Ion engines propelled it slowly through the upper cloud layers of Zorathia. Jonathan watched on the secondary monitor. A video stream appeared. The drone skimmed through the plasma cloud, its spectral camera picking up streaks of luminescent blue light, distributed in grids like static electricity. A gust of ion wind swept across, sending the drone careening slightly. But immediately the bionic steering system adjusted itself. The drone stabilized light as a falling leaf. In the cabin, Ben folded his arms, his voice dry. "Do you really believe these mechanical butterflies are going to replace our feet? Putting our feet on the ground, touching tree roots, streams, rocks, that's real bioarchaeology." Jonathan turned to look at him. He exhaled, his voice low, not angry. Touch Columbus touched, and the continent was wiped out by smallpox. "We did not bring the disease to Eden, and we did not bring its disease to Earth," Mark interjected, half joking, half serious. "Or maybe it won't give us a chance to bring anything back." The cabin air quieted. The signal lights slowly scanned the faces of all three people. On the screen, the drones continued to drop sensor beams to the lower levels, detecting moisture, collecting microbiological samples, and sending them back to the lab module outside the ship. Jonathan touched the control panel, his voice low but clear enough for the system to pick up. "Nicholas Vaughn has bought us freedom from SETI from NASA, but that freedom does not mean we can taint what we do not understand. We only observe. We do not touch. And if anyone asks why, tell them we are not smart enough to know what we are carrying in our hands." Ben smiled, but said nothing more. Outside the window, drones circled like mechanical fireflies, disappearing into the glowing clouds of Zorathia. Below, the lights still moved like silent blood, pulsing, waiting for someone to look down. Through the spectroscopic camera, the layers of air appear as colorful swirls, like ink jets that shoot out and melt into ripples across the sky. The drone's ion engine vibrates gently, keeping it aloft, preventing it from being sucked too quickly into the low-pressure zone. In the Odyssey, Jonathan folded his arms over the live video feed. The atmospheric data poured in like a long line of numbers: ion density, plasma temperature, emission frequency. All were 3 times higher than predicted by simulations on Earth. Living plasma particles. Mark muttered, eyes unblinking, as if afraid that if he missed a second he would miss something that had never been seen by humans. Ben glanced over beside him. He highlighted a row of numbers. "These ions are enough to burn through normal iron probes. Luckily, these biomoths can breathe on their own. Jonathan said nothing. He just nodded, his eyes still glued to the image, a sea of swirling clouds, thin electrodes rolling along the drone's surface, creating blue-purple spots of light like the eyes of some animal that had just glanced and disappeared. The plasma cloud thinned, revealing a shimmering sea of light beneath. From above, the Zorathia forest was unlike any place Jonathan had ever studied. Dots of light flickered constantly, running along the veins of the leaves like glowing blood vessels. Some of the light shifted, as if the forest wasn't standing still, but shifting its structure as if the trees were breathing together. Another drone number 05 pans its camera to the left. It captures a large lake with a mirror-like surface. Light from the seaweed forest on the shore reflects off the lake, creating a reflective effect. The entire surface of the lake glows a pale turquoise. Every waterline looks as if someone has drawn it with an electroluminescent thread. "Everything glows," Mark muttered almost to himself. Ben chuckled, but the laughter died away as Jonathan spoke, his voice even and slightly hoarse. "It's not just glowing, it's synchronized. This light isn't spontaneous, it's rhythmic." Jonathan pointed to a pulsing graph. The drone's spectral sensor data showed the light coming out at a steady rate, almost like the beta brain waves humans produce during REM sleep. The drones scanned a few more wind patterns, detecting unusually warm gusts of air carrying tiny biogas particles. A small warning signal popped up. Drone 04 reported that it had picked up a potential biogas sample. From the lab module outside the Odyssey, a robotic arm controlled a mini probe inside the drone. It gently touched the ionizing airstream, picking up a trail of strange gas containing clusters of autoluminescent particles. Mark almost held his breath as the DNA sequencer screen came on. The data streamed in like a fountain. A cluster of base pairs appeared, a short stretch of genes less than 500 bases long. What was unusual, the helix sequence had a repeating sequence, an exact match to the gene sequence embedded in the welcome home signal that Odyssey had tracked from Earth. Ben slapped his hand on the back of his chair. "Hey, it matches 98%. You see, Jonathan, the genetic sequence in Zorathia's atmosphere is the one Voyager sent back." Jonathan didn't answer, but Mark leaned forward. "How do genes broadcast who put DNA in the atmosphere? Who designed this thing?" In Jonathan's mind, all the old theories collapsed. A planet that could replicate and spread DNA through the clouds, and worse, that DNA carried the command "Welcome Home." So, who was welcoming whom? Drone 04 continued to glide through a patch of algae. The camera captured a giant biotope. The algae clumps changed color from blue to pale purple, then flickered on and off like a network of lights. The video was sent back to the Odyssey. Mark shakily saved the file, his hand scanning the code to analyze it. The light emitted was in sync with the radio waves the drone was sending, which meant the forest was responding, as if the drone was broadcasting and the forest was responding. Ben took a long drag, his hand lightly pounding the edge of the table. "This isn't observation, this is conversation. And do I know what I'm saying?" Suddenly, the drone's screen jerked. The camera image flickered, the light below it brightened, then went dark for a second. The data transmitted back to the Odyssey shuddered. The welcome home signal frequency repeated, but this time it wasn't coming through the main antenna. It was echoing back through the drone's own circuitry. Jonathan leaned close to the screen, his voice low, almost suppressed. "Damn. It's climbing on my nerves." In the cabin, Ben pushed back in his chair and stood up. "Stop the drone, call it back, we're out of control." But Mark's voice trembled. "No, wait, look." The final image from drone number 04 was still a few seconds away from total lag. On the forest floor, the light contracted into a dark green circle, inside of which a vine-covered stone pillar-like structure loomed, emitting a pulsing light. The circle expanded, then went dark. The camera went black. The Odyssey radar pinged back, searching for drone 04, but there was only static. On the cabin speakers, the welcome home signal repeated 3 times, then cut off like someone had turned off the lights. Jonathan looked at Ben and Mark. His voice was chillingly cold. Zorathia didn't need to invite me down. It just pulled my eyes down and then crawled back into them. Outside the Odyssey's window, the remaining drones hovered like a swarm of mechanical fireflies hovering lightly above a sea of bright clouds. Down below, the biosphere was still breathing, and it seemed to whisper softly, "Welcome home." Outside the Odyssey drone, Aero 7 rotated slowly, its ion engine emitting a faint blue glow. The cockpit's control screen showed the drone gliding closer, only a few hundred meters above the canopy of the bioluminescent algae. The radar screen on the console vibrated slightly and the static seemed to disappear, replaced by a smooth, steady pulse, as if someone had tamed the strange ion atmosphere. Jonathan stood behind Ben, arms crossed. They both stared at the drone's live feed. A stream of images appeared in the dark sea of clouds. Something moved, slow, steady flickering. The drone's spectroscopic camera zooms in a cluster of tiny scattered but strung-out dots. Each one is about the size of a fingertip, its body nearly transparent. Inside its core, it emits pulsating light, a mildly ionized plasma like a biological firefly, but at a frequency dozens of times higher than normal light. Mark widened his eyes, almost gasping for breath. "Is that a creature?" "A firefly." Ben tapped his fingers on the edge of his chair, his voice tense. "It's swimming in plasma. That's no ordinary firefly." The drone rotates slowly, locking the angle. The camera records the entire swarm of glowing creatures moving like a living strand of DNA. They don't move randomly. On the contrary, the plasma fireflies fly in spirals, curling like giant nerve fibers of light. Jonathan glanced at Mark. "Send out the tracking radar. See if they react." Mark pressed the command. The drone emitted a low-frequency pulse signal just to locate the creatures. Normally, any species would scatter, avoiding the source of the signal. But the swarm of plasma fireflies did not retreat. On the contrary, they stopped. Then they slowly circled around Drone 07 like a school of small fish circling a submarine. The Odyssey screen flashed with an alert pulse echo. A new wave, extremely pure, flashed. Ben leaned down, his face close to the console. Data appeared like blood dripping in code. The Firefly's optical pulse frequency matched the altered Voyager signal. Mark swallowed. "They're responding. They're bouncing the signal back to the drone." On the radar, the wave pattern appeared in bands, blobs of plasma forming double helices. Each creature was a point of light flashing in rhythm. The flashes weren't random. Mark realized it was coded like Morse code, except this was optical. Morse firing pulses of light instead of sound. Jonathan whispered, "Zorathia is not silent. It is speaking for itself." Ben looked at Drone 07, his voice hoarse. "We thought the drones were the eyes, but look, they're hovering around, checking the hull, scanning the signal back. They're looking back." The plasma fireflies didn't just fly around. Some of them slid close to the drone's camera lens, emitting a powerful light. The camera lens lagged and the image flickered. In that flicker, the Odyssey radar jumped, reporting. The echo frequency was sending data back to Odyssey, bypassing the main broadcast channel and going straight into the drone's transmission. Mark lowered his voice almost fearfully. "Drones are no longer cameras. Ben, drones are becoming reverse antennas." Ben stifled a curse. He slammed the scan button. "Spectral scan. I want to know what this creature has inside it." Drone 07 turned on its analysis laser. A beam gently scanned the nearest plasma spot. A small drop of ion plasma fell out the drone, immediately collected it with a nanosuck that sealed it, and sent it back to the Odyssey lab module hanging outside the ship. Lab screen shows preliminary analysis of biological plasma sample. In the core of the plasma, there is a piece of DNA floating small but enough to display a base pair sequence nearly 500 characters long. Jonathan looked at the fix code string and muttered, "No way." Mark almost exclaimed, "It matches 94%. The DNA sequence in this firefly matches the welcome home signal." Ben backed away from his chair. Zorathia doesn't broadcast via satellite. It uses living organisms. Each of these plasma fireflies is a living packet of data. Jonathan slowly turned his chair toward the observation window. Outside, Drone 07 was floating amid a swarm of plasma fireflies. The tiny dots of light were like nerve fibers twisted into a web. The web pulsed, sending signals back, each wave pulsing through the drone bouncing back at Odyssey. Mark muttered, his hands shaking slightly. "If this is an invitation, then it is not an invitation to land. It is an order to open the door for Zorathia to climb up." Ben glanced at Jonathan, his voice slow but firm. "Drones are no longer safe. We thought we were in control. It's a door that opens backwards. Zorathia is crawling through the eye of the needle we made." The Odyssey radar gave a warning signal. The plasma firefly's frequency was starting to conflict with the drone's internal frequency. The screen jerked. The image flickered, then a blurry command appeared. "Welcome home." Characters scrolled across, not through the satellite channel but directly from the drone's live feed. Jonathan exhaled, his voice almost a whisper. "Zorathia doesn't need a radio. It is a radio, and its creature is a living antenna." Drone camera number 07 pans to the final angle. The image appears a swarm of plasma fireflies is separating, forming a symmetrical spiral like a giant eye hanging right above the canopy of the bioluminescent algae forest. The circle of light pulsates, slightly pulsing. The pulse matches the heartbeat. Jonathan slowly typed out the command to close the secondary signal stream, but the Odyssey radar kept pinging steadily. The voice in the cabin was as soft as a whisper. "Welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home." In the Odyssey capsule, the signal lights reflected on the faces of Ben, Mark, and Jonathan, 3 men standing in a steel capsule hundreds of miles above the planet's surface, but their hearts knew distance no longer existed. The Odyssey engineering module's curtains closed, and the low hiss of compressed air was like a sigh. Drone 07 hovered in the deionization chamber, its butterfly-winged shell glowing, faintly reflecting the green lab lights. A few specks of plasma remained on the drone's body, glittering and melting like light dust. Mark typed commands into the console, his eyes glued to the newly extracted DNA data from the plasma particle. 94% match to the welcome home signal. A small radio-like genetic organism, a moving door. Ben stood beside him, his arms crossed, his eyes dark. "We lost drone number 04. Now, number 07 is infected. Who can say that these things won't follow the waves back to Odyssey?" Jonathan didn't answer. He walked over to the lab module window, looking through the glass. The Zorathia surface below was still flickering with bioluminescence. The plasma firefly network had just dispersed, but the Odyssey radar was still pinging. The biosphere was breathing right below them, just a few hundred miles above the atmosphere. Mark turned in his chair, took off his goggles, and said urgently, "Ben, you know, this can't just be sitting around. This data, it's bigger than anything SETI has ever found. If we lower the sampling module, touch that pulsing stone, we'll bring something real back to Earth." Ben laughed dryly. "Really, as real as the smallpox Columbus brought to the New World. You want to touch Zorathia, or do you want it to crawl into your lungs and crawl back to Earth?" The Odyssey radar pinged once. Jonathan turned, holding up his hands. That's enough. Listen to me." The entire module cabin fell silent. Jonathan pointed to the main screen where the radar scanned the Zorathia model. Plasma clouds, algae forests, bioluminescent lakes, plasma fireflies, all woven into a seamless unified biosphere. When Voyager sent out the golden record, we said hello. But we didn't expect that greeting to come back carrying DNA. Now the biosphere is saying hello back, using our own drones, our own tools to speak. He paused for a second, his eyes flicking to Mark. To touch the ground now would mean touching a biosphere capable of replicating life signals. If we bring anything back, it won't just be rock, it will be something alive. Mark shot back. "So, you mean to stand here and watch forever? Turn the Odyssey into a telescope?" Nicholas invested billions just to sit there and scan the waves. The main screen flashed. A hologram window popped up. The line was clear. The Vaughn Industries logo was visible. Nicholas Vaughn, a thin face, deep eyes, the light from the Earth office illuminating half of his face. The voice echoed through the Odyssey cabin. "I see Jonathan, Ben, Mark. I heard the whole thing." Ben clenched his fists. Mark turned in his chair, pale. Jonathan just smacked his lips. "Nicholas, I'm watching closely." Vaughn didn't smile. He nodded slowly, his voice flat and emotionless. "I didn't pay Odyssey to let you guys kill yourselves out there. The bio data is complete. The genetic sequence is complete. The drones will continue scanning. No one is to go to the surface. No modules are to land. Anyone who violates this will have their oxygen locked automatically by Odyssey." Ben looked at Jonathan. "Did you hear that? The captain has given the order." Mark argued, "We are sitting on a gold mine. What are you afraid of? If we don't touch it, we are just like old Seedy sitting and counting waves." Nicholas Vaughn interrupted, his voice steady. "Mark, you were chosen for your brains, not your limbs. Don't forget Odyssey belongs to me. And the data you collect belongs to me." The screen went black. The Odyssey cabin went silent, save for the radar pings like a slowing heartbeat. Jonathan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Images overlapped in his mind. Drone 004, losing signal, plasma fireflies swirling around its camera, DNA strands floating. He understood Mark. He understood the hunger for data that every scientist who had ever sat here had. But he understood Ben, too. He understood the fear of touching something that humans had never properly understood. He whispers, almost monologuing. The 11 Labs voice will read this passage slowly, deeply. "When we look at a new world, it looks back at us. But worse, sometimes it changes us before we can even touch it." The Odyssey's radar buzzed. A burst of signal cut across the cabin. The code appeared on the secondary screen, not via Earth satellite, not via drone circuitry, but straight into the Odyssey's main feed. 3 words appeared, clearly green as fireflies: "Welcome home." But this time, below the text, there was an additional command, just 3 words like an invitation: "Come closer." Jonathan opened his eyes. The green radar reflected his face: confusion, longing, and growing fear. Behind him, Mark and Ben, 2 poles apart, one wanting to step down, the other wanting to lock himself away. Out there, Zorathia was still shining, still breathing, still whispering, "Welcome home." Odyssey's radar continued to hum like a mechanical heartbeat. Drone number 108 hovered at the edge of the plasma cloud. Below, the algae forest glowed in green clusters, and clusters of plasma fireflies circled in threads of light like floating blood vessels. The whole thing was like a breathing biosphere, eyes open, staring straight up at Odyssey's orbit. Jonathan leaned against the console, looking at Mark and then at Ben. None of them spoke for several minutes. They listened to the radar pings, watched the drone's camera scan the field of plasma pillars where drone 104 had lost contact. The screen showed a string of biological data, a distorted welcome home signal, along with a string of DNA base pairs like a genetic strand floating in the blackness. Mark whispered, his voice a mixture of urgency and fear. If the drone goes a little lower, we can get samples at the base of the stone pillar. Maybe we can figure out what's sending this damn signal. Ben smiled faintly, not bothering to hide his sigh. You want to touch it. Touch the thing that is spontaneously emitting a signal, using DNA. You want to bring it back to the Odyssey lab, then bring it back to Earth. Then hang it over the heads of all humans. The drone rotated slowly, the camera focusing on a plasma spot larger than a normal firefly. The creature swam slowly, its inner core pulsing steadily. Each time it glowed, the radar vibrated slightly. It did not avoid the drone. It circled as if measuring the distance. Jonathan pursed his lips. He had flown half his life to see things no scientist had ever touched. And right now, the line between seeing not touching was as thin as a bubble. Ben leaned in, his voice low and commanding. Pull up the drone. Odyssey is meant to observe, not be a bioportal. Mark shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the console tightly. If you're scared, then who's going to find the answers? We flew billions of kilometers just to look through a lens, then stay home and look through a telescope. Jonathan interrupted. His voice was hoarse but clear. Both of you shut up. He stepped closer to the screen, his finger pointing at the DNA strand appearing on the radar, the genetic strand blinking slowly alive as if waiting for someone to call its name. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Observation always begins with a promise: I will only look, not touch. But if I look long enough, my heart will want to touch. And when I touch, what I see touches me back. Ben bowed his head. Mark fell silent. The Odyssey cabin was silent except for the radar, which kept pinging steadily like an iron heartbeat. Drone -08 suddenly vibrated. A sudden signal pulsed back. The words, "Welcome home," appeared clearly. But this time, right below it, was a new line. "Remember." Jonathan looked at the words, feeling a chill run down his spine. Who was reminding them? What was it? A strange signal from the biosphere, or a reminder of the very thing that had followed humanity since the days of Voyager? The drone camera panned slowly one last time. At the edge of the algae forest, the large plasma creature continued to glide by. It didn't attack, it didn't hide it, just glowed rhythmically like breathing or waiting. Jonathan turned to look at Ben, then Mark. His voice was calm, but the corners of his mouth were clenched with unnamed fear. Pull the drone up. Odyssey will continue to observe. We haven't come down yet, but that thing won't stay still. Sooner or later it will come up. The radar kept pinging steady slow. The string, "Welcome home." "Remember," ran like a thread embedded deep into the silence of the Odyssey cabin, like an open door just waiting for someone to step forward.